For many years now, people have been debating who is the smarter mad scientist, the Archmagos Belisarius Cawl or the clone lord Fabius Bile. But who exactly are these dudes? Why do a lot of diehard 40K fans say that they're the two most important characters in the entirety of the setting at this exact moment in time? And if they're so important, why are they both hated and feared by so many, including a large portion of their allies? In this video, we're going to examine both of these characters in depth to figure out what drives both of them to do what they do, learn about what they've accomplished so far and what their goals are for the future, as well as comparing and contrasting the different methods that they utilize, as well as their conflicting philosophies. Both of these guys may be on opposing sides, but they may just have more in common than one may think. Now, Warhammer 40K has a lot of roided up dude bro characters that solve all of their problems with a heavy bolter. And don't get it twisted, I'm into it. But in my personal opinion, the characters that are capable of getting what they want by outsmarting everyone else around them tend to be a lot more interesting to actually read about, especially when they're as dark and messed up as Bile and Cawl. And a quick heads up, I'm still getting over that cold, so if my voice sounds a little off in this video, that's what's going on. Anyways, before we dive headfirst into the Grimdark, I gotta tell you all about these dope shirts that you see in all of my videos. They come from the sponsor of today's video, Into the AM. If you haven't heard yet, Into the AM is having its biggest sale of the year this Black Friday. It's going to be 30 to 80% off site-wide until November 30th. If you couldn't tell, I'm a huge fan of their shirts, as their quality is always top-notch and they never disappoint. Which is why they're perfect for the upcoming holiday season as gifts or even just for yourself. I just recently picked up a whole bunch more of their shirts, and as always, I couldn't be happier with them. Now, personally speaking, I like graphic tees with either a retro aesthetic or loud, colorful graphics. And boy howdy does Into the AM totally deliver on that front. These designs are absolutely amazing, and I'm a huge fan of their signature style. I can honestly tell you that these are my favorite shirts that I own. Their quality's top-notch, they're super comfortable, they've got a little bit of extra length for my tall and wide brothers and sisters, and they're even shrink and fade resistant. I can't stress enough how big their Black Friday sale is going to be, and there's going to be some seriously massive discounts. So if you've been eyeballing some of their shirts and you still haven't pulled the trigger on them yet, now's never been a more perfect opportunity to grab some of these amazing shirts at an even better price. But here's the best news. They went the extra mile for my audience. If you click on the link in the description of this video or use code Weshammer at checkout, you'll save an additional 10% off your entire order. Now, most of the time, companies will frustratingly override YouTuber discount codes if there's a better sale going on, but not Into the AM. It stacks with their already super discounted prices. Head on over to intotheam.com/Weshammer today to save a ton on some amazing shirts. Big thanks to Into the AM for sponsoring this video.
There are few names uttered within the war-torn galaxy of the 42nd millennium that conjure as much dread as that of Fabius Bile. Although Bile is his true name, he has gone by many titles during his long and twisted career. He is known as the Primogenitor, the Clone Father, the Man Flayer, the Spider, and most recently, as he's begun to be worshipped by millions and potentially billions of his creations, the Pater Mutatus. Early in his life, he rose through the ranks of the Emperor's children and eventually became their chief apothecary, a once proud and noble figure that fought to save the lives of his brothers and rid the Emperor's children of the horrific disease that subjected them to torturous, cancerous deaths. Nowadays, he operates alone, having spit upon all of the oaths he once held so sacred. He is a free agent that works his way through the cosmos like a quote-unquote shard of glass through an intestinal tract. He is a darkly ingenious scientist and a deranged sculptor of flesh. Countless worlds have suffered at his hands, their populations being rendered down into nothing more than laboratory resources and test subjects for his vile experiments. Every single world his shadow has ever blighted will attest to his flesh-crafting skills. He is able to manipulate his test subjects down from the surface of their skin to the core of their very genetics. He leaves behind a trail of deviant and twisted abominations wherever he goes. He has successfully cloned each and every one of the Primarchs dozens of times over, even creating a nearly perfect copy of Fulgrim. However, out of all of the crazy things that Bile has made, by far his absolute masterpiece has been the New Men Project. You see, Bile's philosophy is that humanity as a species is so deeply flawed that in order for the human race to continue on into the future, it will need to be replaced by something even better. In a sense, he wants to save the species through genocide, creating a superior version of it which will wipe out its predecessor. In his own words, evolution is brutal and unforgiving. Throughout the Horus Heresy, Bile created all manner of genetic monstrosity, deranged abominations that channeled their hatred for him into savage and brutal attacks against whoever the Clone Lord pointed them at. By the 32nd millennium, however, his skills would have improved dramatically. He created what were known as gland hounds, genetically superior humans that were specifically designed to hunt down space marines. Now, one-on-one, they were no match for an Astartes, but there were a lot of them. They were made to be pack hunters, and they were very good at what they did. The next stage in their evolution would come when Bile finally learned the art of humility and let his children go, setting them free to carve their own path throughout the galaxy as they were embedded upon worlds all the way across the Milky Way. Over the next 8,000 years, they would develop their own societies and would breed into a new species of new men, whom, although we don't have a name for their new iteration, we do get to see an example of one of them in action in Genefather, and if there's a whole lot more individuals like her, then the Imperium is in trouble. Much like his rival, Belisarius Cawl has earned a vast array of titles and monikers over his long career. He is the Archmagos Dominus, a Magos Biologus, the prime conduit of the Omnissiah, and Gentor Majoris. Even if they are not directly tied to him, most of the great technologies employed by the Imperium owe at least one element of their creation to Belisarius Cawl, his most famous creation being that of the Primaris Marines, as well as all of the weapons, war gear, and vehicles they utilize in battle. The Primaris themselves were an improvement upon the designs of the Master of Mankind, something that was thought impossible. Although we don't know exactly how old he is, it is said that he was already an old man late in his career at the birth of the Imperium. Having been in active service since those ancient times, it stands to reason that Belisarius Cawl has over 11 millennia of collective wisdom and experience. Although he calls Mars his homeworld, it's not only Skitarii from the Red Planet that he commands when he marches to war, as many other Forge Worlds have aligned themselves with his pursuits, most notably Forge Worlds within or near the realm of Ultramar, likely due to Cawl's close connection with Guilliman. They offer him whatever resources or troops he needs in exchange for a taste of his wisdom. Cawl has hands down recovered more STCs than any Magos or techno-archaeologist that has come before, and has made incalculable strides in the Mechanicus' never-ending pursuit of knowledge. He is a master of every form of study and academic pursuit, and although to call him an egotistical narcissist would be a huge understatement, everything he does for the betterment of humanity. The laws of the Imperium and the cult Mechanicus and the limitations of reality be damned. He is without question a techno-savant, an absolutely brilliant intellectual that quickly masters any single field that he sets his mind to. And as somebody who struggles with ADD, I 100% relate to how he operates. Cawl is fascinated by everything and has a deep appreciation for knowledge and learning. One minute he may be designing and constructing the largest macro-mag cannon Mars has ever seen, and the next he is perfecting his experimental stasis field technology, only to then jump off of that project and begin designing the machines that will need to be used in order to terraform planets destroyed by the Tyranids. He has so many projects in motion at any given time that he's actually constructed additional copies of himself to ensure that they're each given his undivided attention. As Cawl's accelerated mind jumps from project to project, so too does he reconfigure his plasma forges, magna coil weavers, crystal alloy aligners, and other immense sigil-carved engines so that production never falters and is always keeping pace with his own eccentric pursuits. To say that Belisarius Cawl and a sizable portion of the Adeptus Mechanicus don't exactly see eye to eye is an understatement, as just about half of the Forge Worlds view him as a heretic that openly spits on the ideals and dogmatic traditions of the machine cult. And that's just for what he does out in the open. Most of his detractors have no idea how deep Cawl's tech heresy runs, as deep within his private laboratories, he has begun reverse engineering Xenos technology, fostering relationships with said aliens, and even creating multiple different forms of abominable intelligence. Despite all this, his detractors have to admit that Cawl is a one-of-a-kind genius that, quite frankly, gets stuff done. So now that we know a little bit more about who Bile and Cawl both are, we can compare and contrast them to find the answer to a very important question. Which one of these dudes is smarter? And fair warning, I'm gonna do my absolute best to be as unbiased and factual as possible, using as many examples as I can from the novels. But when it comes to those novels, Fabius Bile has a whole trilogy dedicated to him, whereas Cawl only has the Great Work. I've read all 4 of these books and they're fantastic, but I have a little bit more insight into Bile than I do Cawl. That being said, both of these characters have played smaller roles in dozens of other novels that I've read, but I haven't read everything about them, so I might be missing a few things. If you disagree with me on any of these points, I would absolutely love to hear your take in the comments section. I want to start this comparison by saying that both of these characters are geniuses. Amongst humanity, they are at the top of the pack when it comes to pure intellect and raw capability. Their only real rivals being aliens from other much more ancient species. And when it comes to figuring out which one of these individuals is smarter, you could realistically make a good faith argument for either one. But that being said, there are distinct differences that we can highlight, and we can also all admit an uncomfortable and disturbing amount of similarities as well, whether you be a member of the Emperor's Faithful or a follower of the Ruinous Powers. At one point in Genefather, Bile admits to one of his followers that Cawl certainly has the edge when it comes to designing weapons, war gear, and vehicles. If put to the test and they both had to improve on, say, a bolter, what Cawl brought to the table would certainly be better than anything Bile could make. However, Bile attests that he is the far superior geneticist and bioengineer. For although Cawl did create the Primaris Marines, it took him 10,000 years to do so. And even then, it was simply improving upon somebody else's designs, whereas Bile's new men were designed from the ground up by himself. However, if you were to ask Belisarius Cawl, he would say that Bile's creations are nothing more than monstrosities and abominations wrought from the suffering of untold billions, not the next step in human evolution as Bile claims. Now, despite the bickering between both of these characters, I would definitely give the edge in matters of biology, chemistry, genetic engineering, and flesh crafting in all its forms to Fabius Bile. Especially considering the fact that A, he's cloned all of the Primarchs, in his own words, dozens of times over, and B, this dude's flesh crafting was so on point, he managed to impress the homunculi and was invited to study underneath them on Camorra, a species that is both renowned and infamous for their progress in this particular department, and has more than 1,000,000 years head start on him. However, considering just the sheer overwhelming amount of new tech that Cawl has been able to produce, there's no question that he is the master of robotics and a superior engineer. In the novel The Great Work, Belasrius Cawl managed to study the Pharaoh's device and supposedly knows how it works. Back in the War in Heaven, this thing played an integral part in the Necron's ability to travel faster than the speed of light, as not only does it function as an astronomicon without the input of psychers, but it's also capable of teleporting objects great distances. Also, turns out it wasn't a singular thing. There were tons of them spread out across the galaxy. Remember that the whole point of the Emperor's Webway project was to give humanity the ability to travel across the Milky Way without the use of the warp. So, although he hasn't recreated the technology yet, if he is capable of doing that and does truly understand all of its ins and outs, Cawl may just be able to succeed where the Emperor himself failed. But as this has not exactly happened yet, I'm going to jot it down in the realm of theoreticals. But considering Cawl interfaced with the device directly as well as the captured Catan shard that was powering it, the fact that he has close relations with Trazyn the Infinite, that he reverse-engineered Necron technology, and is constantly attempting to develop diplomatic relationships with them, all signs point to the fact that he will eventually gain mastery over Necron tech and make this a reality. An often overlooked, but in my opinion perfect example of his mastery of tons of different subjects is that Cawl is capable of terraforming worlds taken and destroyed by the Tyranids. Now, inhabiting a world that the Tyranids have eaten is highly illegal, but Cawl claims that he'd be able to get a rudimentary ecosystem re-established on these planets with no lingering Tyranid infection in less than 100 years. And terraforming a planet is a massive, massive undertaking with billions of moving parts. The fact that Cawl is capable of doing something like that on a whim is pretty crazy. There's also a few other things to really bear in mind about both of these characters. Cawl was given the task of perfecting the Space Marines by Guilliman himself, and as a respected Magos of the Adeptus Mechanicus, he had access to pretty much unlimited resources, even more so now that Guilliman has returned. His own personal ship, an Arch Mechanicus known as the Zar Quasitor, is for all intents and purposes a literal floating forge world. This is not the same for Bile. The dude's been out in the Eye of Terror and is a pariah even amongst Chaos Space Marines. The only resources he has access to is whatever he's able to find, steal, or trade for. And even still, both of these individuals are considered to be on the same level. This is just my personal opinion, but it's like if we were to take two people and give one of them $1 billion and the other $5 and a firm handshake, and then both manage to build thriving, successful businesses. Yeah, they may be equals, but I feel like one of these dudes had to work a hell of a lot harder for it. Now, that being said, even if Belisarius Cawl did have an unfair advantage when it comes to resources, and the fact that he wasn't spending every waking moment of his life being hunted by dozens of different factions, this doesn't change the fact that those connections he has have afforded him vastly more experience and the ability to pursue knowledge in thousands of different fields compared to Bile's more focused pursuits. And when it comes to sheer raw experience, Cawl just has a lot more time in the game than Bile does. Both of these individuals were born before the start of the Great Crusade over 10,000 years ago, but Cawl has spent all of that time in real space, sans multiple periods where he went into stasis for several decades in order to recuperate. Just like every other Chaos Space Marine, Bile has felt the touch of the warp, and time moves differently for him. So for him, 10,000 years may have only really been 2,000, 5,000, 7,000. We don't really have an exact estimation on this. This is Future West coming in to do a quick edit here because I felt like I should make a little point. In the first Fabius Bile book, he does have a moment where he says that he's been studying something for 10,000 years, even though the book takes place in the 32nd millennium, which was definitely weird and may have just been a typo on the author's part, because if it wasn't, then that would mean that the warp made time move slower for Bile, which I've never heard of that happening before. It's possible, but it's more likely that this was just a typo. Anyways, back to what I was saying before. However, in Bile's defense, in this exact same department, Belisarius Cawl has had his mind mysteriously wiped on multiple occasions. It's said that he has forgotten more knowledge than hundreds of the most skilled magi of the Adeptus Mechanicus combined could ever hope to learn in a single lifetime. When it comes to their religious beliefs, Fabius Bile has an absolute disdain for all deities, be they corpse emperor or ruinous power. He acknowledges the existence of a sentience within the warp, but from his perspective, the gods are nothing more than roiling energy. They're sentient fart clouds that gained consciousness, and then a bunch of idiots started praying to them. Belisarius Cawl, on the other hand, does venerate and worship the machine god, though he doesn't cling as tightly to the machine cult's traditions as his more conservative peers within the Adeptus Mechanicus. And speaking of the Adeptus Mechanicus and their beliefs, in their eyes, one of the gravest sins they can do is to innovate. As to innovate is to think that you know better than the ancient ancestors from the Dark Age of technology, who they believe had a much greater connection to the machine god than they do today. So needless to say, innovation is blasphemy to them. There's a really interesting scene in Genefather where Belisarius Cawl reveals to a group of magi that even though he has committed the sin of innovation, that part is true, this is his way of honoring the machine god and their ancient ancestors from the Dark Age of technology, to which the crowd of tech priests is not happy to hear that. He goes on to say that he isn't innovating by creating something new. That would mean he believes himself superior to them. Quite the contrary, he is studying and discovering the techniques that those who came before used to create all of their wondrous machines, so that he can do the same, rather than looking at an exact blueprint in the STC. He goes on to say that he's experimented with this on multiple occasions. He took something like 20 different STCs, and instead of cracking them open, he put all of the knowledge that he had gained into the techniques utilized by their ancestors in order to create what he assumed would be inside of it. And then, sure enough, each and every time he cracked one of them opened, it was a mirror copy of the device he had created, which is absolutely remarkable to think about. He basically says, I know what I'm doing looks like innovation, but it's anything but. I'm doing exactly what the Mechanicus is supposed to do. Just instead of studying the blueprint to make the machine, I'm studying the techniques that were used to create the blueprint. It's definitely not innovation and thus technically not heresy. Opinions were kind of up in the air on this with all of the magi, but I thought he made a pretty good point. When it comes to both Cawl and Bile's brains, they are each a Gestalt consciousness. In Fabius Bile's case, by mastering the construction, cultivation, and overall workmanship of Eldari Wraithbone, he was able to create a mind transfer device that allowed him to basically do what the Necrons do, wherein they can download their consciousness into a new body. He did this by cloning himself hundreds of times over, and whenever he would get sick and get close to dying, he would transfer into a new, younger version of himself. Now, just so you know, I'm about to spoil the epilogue of Manflayer, which is the third book in the Bile trilogy. I'm not going to spoil the whole series, but there's a point I want to make that's in the epilogue. So if you don't want to hear about that, skip forward about a minute. Anyways, this cloning and mind transfer process would get kicked up to an entirely different level at the end of Manflayer. Now, the original Bile died, but was put into a biostasis crypt in a fortress of Wraithbone, wherein he slept and slowly began to resurrect over the next 8,000 years, eventually waking back up after the opening of the Great Rift. Now, during the time in which he slept, dozens of his clones were active and spread throughout the galaxy, and through the Wraithbone implants that he had created and put into each and every one of their brains, he was able to experience everything they did simultaneously, and all of their wisdom, accomplishments, and gained knowledge fed back into the original, where it was all mushed together and then transported back out to all of the clones. Eventually, he was resurrected and still to this day maintains that network of clones. With Belisarius, on the other hand, he has made ample use of an ancient forbidden technological practice known as soul merging, wherein two individuals can become one by merging all of their collective wisdom and experience together. Fun fact, the first time that this was done to him was kind of against his will, where his own research was used against him. There was this man named Ezekiel Sedane, the second director of the Imperial Biotechnical Division during the Horus Heresy, one of the key figureheads who worked on the Astartes project and the inventor of the Space Marines' Black Carapace. He had gotten really old and sick and attempted to blackmail a younger version of Cawl by shooting his best friend and telling him that he would restore him to life only if Cawl allowed him to use the technology to take over his body. Cawl begrudgingly allowed this to save his friend's life, but after the procedure was done, his personality was way too strong and dominated Sedane's, so now he was still him, but with all of Sedane's wisdom in the field of bioengineering. Over the millennia, Cawl would do this over and over with other brilliant scientists for one reason or another, to the point where he's now described as not just a collective consciousness, but a legion of souls. However, as the Mechanicus would say, the flesh is weak, and even Cawl's heavily augmented brain can't store such an enormous amount of knowledge. Every 500 years or so, he has to go through a period of selectively purging great chunks of it. As I mentioned earlier in this video, Bile has cloned each of the Primarchs dozens of times over, something that no one else has been able to accomplish, as the gene crafting that the Emperor was capable of was simply on another level. Though admittedly, in Bile's own words, none of his clones were perfect, and the ones that got as close as possible to being perfect suffered the same flaws as their predecessors, and a lot of them were drawn towards chaos. Even with the quote-unquote perfect clone of Fulgrim, he admits that he foresaw him following the exact same path that the original Phoenician did. The way he looks at it today is that he was working with a flawed template from the start, and that was the problem. The great irony being, the more perfect his clones were, the more flawed they were, as all of the mistakes that the Emperor made in his original designs were deeply embedded in their genetic code. From the very beginning, the Primarchs were tainted, broken things that were irredeemably touched by the warp. He hasn't found a way of removing them, at least not yet, and insinuates that he plans on making a new one. But it wouldn't exactly be a Primarch, it would be something that truly could be called perfect, a king for his new men. To admittedly grossly and kind of inaccurately undermine Cawl's accomplishments, a lot of what he has done was simply due to the limitations the Mechanicus has placed on itself, and his willingness to simply sidestep them. To many of the more conservative factions within the Machine cult, Cawl is a heretic who employs some truly deplorable methods. If the Mechanicus was not so ruthlessly attached to its ancient traditions, there certainly would be more tech priests that rivaled Belisarius Cawl in their capabilities. But as it is, Cawl stands alone. And when it comes to the flaws of Fabius Bile, he is so obsessed with the pursuit of perfection that he will throw away centuries of work on a whim because something was only 99.9% perfect. He gets so fixated on the flaws that he often struggles to see the whole picture. At one point, Abaddon sends word to him that he wants Chaos Primaris Marines. He wants something as a counter to what Cawl has made. And Bile is sitting there like, yeah, I could do that for you. I could do that in an instant. It would be no problem at all. But why would I? They would be just as flawed as all of the Space Marines are. He says, why settle for 1 in 100 when you could have 1 in 1,000,000? Why settle for chaff? To which one of his followers reminds him that in war, chaff has its uses. One of the major defining differences between Cawl and Bile is how they view humanity. Bile believes we are destined for extinction and that the only hope is to create an even better version of us that will wipe us all out and inherit the galaxy, whereas Cawl has a genuine love and admiration for his species. They're both egotistical narcissists, don't get it twisted, but Cawl wants to save humanity. Bile wants to replace it. Cawl wants to form alliances with the other species throughout the galaxy as it's in the best interest for all, while Bile wants to use them, cannibalizing everything of value and suffering their cooperation so long as it's in his best interest. They have both done truly monstrous and unforgivable things, one admittedly a lot more than the other. And although they both believe that what they are doing is for the greater good, the paths they are on couldn't be more different from one another. Cawl has demonstrated actual, genuine love for other people like his best friend Friedrich, who he continuously clones and creates abominable intelligence constructs of to keep his best friend alive, as he genuinely loves him and would be lost without him. He views Alpha Primus, the first Primaris Marine and his right-hand man, as his son, and loves him just like any father would love their child. On the other hand, Bile does feel a sense of paternal affection for his creations, but feels no remorse in genociding entire planets to further his work. He's like a dangerously intelligent psychopath that is incapable of feeling concepts like love or brotherhood, at least in a way that we would understand them, but will willingly sacrifice himself to protect his new men, the only thing that he truly cares about. Also, fun fact, and this is a way bigger topic than I can squeeze into this video, so I'll have to make another one on it. But it's heavily implied in the novel Manflayer that Fabius Bile either already is or is becoming a new lesser chaos deity, due to him being collectively worshipped by millions, if not at this point, billions of his new men that have spread out across the galaxy. Ave Praetor Mutatis. But like I said, that's a topic for another video. So after all of that, which one of these dudes do I think is smarter? Honestly, it's kind of hard to say. I think Cawl 100% knows a lot more about a lot more topics, whereas Bile has much more specific knowledge. One's a generalist and the other one's a specialist. For me personally, I'd probably have to give it to Cawl just because he has his hands in so many different things, but you could make a good argument for Bile as well. I'm actually kind of stumped on this one. Let me know what your thoughts are down in the comment section below. Which one of these guys do you think is smarter? Which one of them do you think has had more of an impact on the setting? And overall, just which one of them do you like better? Are you more of a Bile fan or do you like Cawl? I will say that both of these characters are two of my favorites in the entire series. Bile probably is my number one and Cawl's probably my number two. But that's likely to change if we get a few more Cawl books, because like as I said earlier in the video, there's just the one that's specifically about him. I really hope he gets a trilogy, and I hope that Genefather gets turned into a trilogy as well. When I set out to make this video, I wanted to have a deep dive of Genefather in it as well, but my script was running really long, so I decided to cut it into two separate videos. So that's still coming. That should honestly be out in a couple of days. I'm on a mean hot streak right now where sleep be damned. I'm staying up all night editing because I'm having a lot of fun with this book. Anyways, big thanks to everyone who supports the work that I do, and I will catch you all in the next one.